At 8 hours on March 15, 1943, New Guinea, Sergeant Thomas Collier lay face down in black jungle mud, observing two of his men die in the open ground ahead. The Marines had been trapped in this position for 6 hours. 6 hours of watching a Japanese bunker cut down anyone who moved. 6 hours of trying everything the manual said would succeed. 6 hours of learning the manual was flawed. The bunker was barely visible, just a narrow slit in the hillside concealed with ferns. But from that slit, a Japanese machine gun had perfect command of the approach. Collier had watched his squad try to cross 3 times. Each time men collapsed. Now 2 were lying in the grass 40 yards ahead, not moving, hemorrhaging where they fell because anyone who went to help them perished too. Collier pressed his face into the mud. His Thompson was clogged with grit. His grenades could not reach the bunker. If their courage moved you even for a moment, subscribe and stand with us in keeping their sacrifice alive. Turn on the bell, because when history whispers, it needs people who refuse to let it be forgotten. His radio crackled with static. Behind him, the platoon was scattered in whatever cover they could find. Ahead, the bunker waited, silent, patient. The Japanese inside did not need to do anything except wait for Americans to move, and then kill them. This was not how Marine infantry was supposed to fight. They were trained for movement, aggression, closing with the enemy and destroying him. But you cannot close with an enemy you cannot see. You cannot destroy a fortification that laughs at everything you throw at it. And you cannot move when the only route is across open ground, covered by a machine gun you cannot kill. Collier keyed his radio. Lieutenant Davis, we are still pinned at checkpoint 7. Bunker intact. Requesting tank support. Over. The response took 3 minutes. Negative on tank support. Ground 2 broken. Mortar support only. Over. Collier closed his eyes. They had already tried mortars. The rounds hit the bunker and detonated harmlessly. The Japanese inside probably did not even feel them. The Japanese had 6 months to prepare these defenses. They cut coconut logs from local jungle, wood tougher than oak, dense enough to stop rifle bullets and resistant to explosives. They poured concrete reinforced with steel rebar salvaged from construction sites. They covered everything with 3 feet of sand to absorb blast and shrapnel. They positioned each bunker with perfect fields of fire, mutually supporting positions that covered every approach. They camouflaged everything so perfectly that American scouts walked within 10 feet of bunkers without seeing them until machine guns opened fire. The result was a fortification that American infantry weapons could not crack and that American doctrine had no answer for. Collier had tried everything the manual said would work. He ordered bar gunners to pour automatic rifle fire into the firing slit. The bullets sparked off concrete and did nothing. The tracers that made it through the slit hit sandbags inside and stopped. He sent flanking teams through the jungle to approach from sides. The bunker had supporting positions covering the flanks. His men walked into interlocking fields of fire and died before getting within grenade range. He called for mortar support. The mortar team dropped shells with textbook accuracy directly on the bunker. The explosions were impressive, throwing sand and debris into the air. When smoke cleared, the bunker was intact and the machine gun opened fire again. The 3 feet of sand had absorbed the blast. The concrete underneath was untouched. At 0400, Collier tried bazookas. The rocket team crawled through mud for 30 minutes to get within 70 yards. They raised the tube and fired. The rocket hit the logs and concrete dead center with a massive explosion. Collier watched through binoculars, believing nothing could survive that blast. When smoke cleared, the bunker had a blackened scorch mark where the rocket hit. The logs were charred but intact. The concrete underneath showed no damage. The machine gun resumed firing within seconds. The bazooka, designed to penetrate tank armor, could not crack a fortification built from jungle materials and patience. Japan needed to hold New Guinea long enough to turn every Pacific island into a fortress that would bleed American forces so badly that invasion became politically impossible. The United States needed to take New Guinea quickly to establish forward airfields and prove Japanese fortress islands could fall. If Japan held for months using bunker warfare, American casualties made advance unsustainable. If America cracked New Guinea in weeks, The path to Tokyo opened, and the war ended in 1945, instead of dragging into 1947 with millions more dead. I spent 6 hours researching and writing this script to show you exactly how the Bofors 40mm anti-aircraft gun worked, why generals banned it from ground combat, and how one sergeant's decision to break that rule changed tactics for 3 wars. If this story matters to you, all I ask in return is that you hit the subscribe button right now. That is it. Just subscribe. Thank you. While Collier and his Marines were dying in mud 400 yards from the bunker, a different scene played out 300 yards behind American lines. A Swedish Bofors 40mm anti-aircraft gun sat in a defensive pit pointing at empty sky guarded by a crew that had not fired a shot in 6 weeks. The Bofors was beautiful engineering. Built in Sweden, designed to fill the sky with rapid-fire shells that could tear apart aircraft, single 40mm autocannon, automatic loader feeding 4-round clips, 120 rounds per minute sustained. Each shell the size of a beer bottle packed with high explosive. The weapon sat on a mount allowing 360 degrees of traverse. The barrel could elevate nearly vertical. The system was a masterpiece of precision engineering built to defend against air attack. It was also completely useless in New Guinea in March 1943 because there were no Japanese aircraft to shoot at. The Japanese Air Force had been systematically destroyed. American fighters had achieved air superiority, so complete the Japanese aircraft rarely appeared. Anti-aircraft guns sat in defensive positions, fully manned, fully supplied, completely inactive. The infantry hated them, not the guns, but what they represented. Bofors crews sat in safe rear positions cleaning weapons, staring at empty sky while infantry died 300 yards ahead for lack of fire support. The resentment was palpable. When Bofors crews walked past infantry positions, they heard comments, muttered insults, suggestions that if they were not shooting anything, they should carry ammunition for men actually fighting. Sergeant Miller commanded the gun. He was 32, Pennsylvania, career Marine who had joined before the war. He knew the Bofors inside out. He could strip the autoloader blindfolded. He knew the sound when the recoil spring needed adjustment. And none of that skill mattered because there were no aircraft to shoot. His crew was 3 Marines. Corporal Stevens the loader, Private Kowalski, ammunition handler, Private Chun, maintenance. They were bored, soul-destroying boredom from sitting in position week after week performing maintenance, waiting for an enemy that never came. Stevens carved wood. Kowalski wrote letters he could not send. Chun cleaned the gun compulsively. Miller sat on the sandbag wall and listened to distant rifle fire from Collier's position. It had been going on for hours. Sporadic bursts, silence, more firing. He knew what it meant. Infantry pinned down, unable to break through, taking casualties. He had heard the same pattern on Guadalcanal. Everywhere Marines fought, the sound was the same. Men dying slowly against an enemy they could not reach. At 0930, Miller's radio crackled. Not command frequency, infantry frequency. He was not supposed to monitor, but listened to anyway. The voice was young, panicked. This is Charlie 7. Still pinned checkpoint 7. Multiple wounded. Cannot retrieve casualties. Requesting fire support. Mortars ineffective. Need something heavier. Please advise. Over. Miller listened to the desperation. He looked at the Bowers. He looked at ammunition crates. Hundreds of 40mm shells. Thousands of rounds. Enough to level a city block, if you could find a target. He looked at the barrel pointing uselessly at sky. An idea formed. Terrible idea. Violated doctrine. Would probably get him court-martialed. But Miller had spent 11 months watching Marines die while he sat on a weapon capable of helping them. Forbidden to act because the manual said anti-aircraft guns were for aircraft, not supporting infantry. Miller stood and walked to the pit edge. He could see smoke from checkpoint 7. He could hear rifle fire. He knew geometry. 400 yards to Collier's Ridge. Another 100 to the bunker. 500 yards total. The Bofors had effective range exceeding 2,000 yards. 500 was point blank for this weapon. The manual was specific. Bofors designed and authorized for anti-aircraft defense only. Using it for ground support was prohibited. The reasoning was simple. Specialized weapons required specialized crews and ammunition. Using them for ground support wasted resources. The doctrine made sense with unlimited weapons and ammunition. Less sense when Marines died 300 yards away and the gun had nothing to shoot. Miller made a decision. He did not ask permission. He did not radio command. He did not check with anyone who could tell him no. He decided watching Marines die while sitting on a weapon that could help was not acceptable. Miller turned to his crew. "Stevens Kowalski-chun, get up. We are moving the gun forward." Stevens looked up. "Moving where, Sarge?" "Forward. Toward the fighting. We are supporting infantry." The crew stared. Kowalski spoke carefully. "Sarge, the manual says we stay in defensive positions. Not supposed to use the gun for ground support." Miller looked at him. "I know what the manual says. The manual was written by people who are not here. We are moving. Get the gun ready." The bow was mounted on a two-wheeled carriage, allowing towing by vehicle or manhandling by crew. Theory said 4 men could move it over flat ground. Practice said moving a 2,000-pound gun through jungle was brutal. The crew rigged ropes. They positioned themselves and pulled. The gun moved slowly. Wheels dug into soft ground. Every route, every depression required stopping, repositioning, pulling harder. The crew soaked through uniforms within minutes. After 30 minutes, they had moved 200 yards, now 100 yards behind Collier. Close enough to see Marines in positions. Close enough to see smoke from the bunker. Miller called halt. The crew collapsed, gasping, drinking from canteens. Miller walked forward alone through jungle until he reached Collier's perimeter. Collier did not turn when Miller approached. He was too exhausted to care. Miller crouched beside him. "Sergeant Collier." Collier lowered binoculars. He saw a clean uniform. No mud, no blood. Rear area Marine. His expression showed what he thought. "Who are you?" "Sergeant Miller. I command the Bofors crew about 100 yards back." Collier waited. "I heard your radio. You are pinned by a bunker you cannot crack." Collier laughed bitterly. "Accurate assessment. You have bright ideas." Miller looked at the hillside. "Show me the bunker." Collier pointed. "See that fern cluster halfway up just below? Horizontal slit. Concrete and logs. 3-foot sand on top. Hit it with everything. Nothing works." Miller studied it. "Range about 400 yards from here. 450 to bunker." Miller did quick math. 450 why? Well within range. Bunker slightly elevated 30 feet above them. Required depression maybe 5 degrees. Achievable if the gun could traverse low enough. The manual specified minimum depression -5 degree, but that assumed you wanted to avoid hitting ground. If you were deliberately targeting ground, you could force the barrel lower by adjusting the mount. Collier watched him. "What are you thinking?" Miller said carefully. "I have a Bofors 40mm anti-aircraft gun 100 yards behind your position." Collier waited. 40mm high explosive shells. 120 rounds per minute sustained. Effective range 2,000 yards. Accuracy at 400 yards is excellent. Collier frowned. "That is an anti-aircraft gun. Shoots planes." Miller nodded. "That is what the manual says." Collier understood. "The manual says you are not supposed to use it for ground support." Miller nodded. "But there are no planes, and you have Marines dying, because you cannot crack that bunker. I think 40mm high explosive will crack it." Collier looked at Hillside at Miller back at Hillside. "You will get court-martialed." Miller shrugged probably. "You want fire support or not?" Collier was quiet. Then he keyed radio. "All Charlie units cease fire. Danger close fire mission incoming. Friendlies pulling back 50 yards. Execute now." Miller moved back to gun position. His crew was ready. They had heard enough radio to understand. Nervous but determined, Miller walked around the bow first, checking traverse, elevation, ammunition. The gun was ready. Now came the hard part, making it do something it was not designed to do. The bows had depression limit built into mount. Could not aim below -5 degree because designers assumed you would never shoot something on ground in front of you. Correct for anti-aircraft, wrong for ground support. Miller needed to aim at a bunker, requiring depressing the barrel significantly below horizontal. He studied the mount. The depression stop was simple mechanical block, preventing elevation wheel from turning past a point held by 2 bolts. Miller grabbed a wrench. Stevens watched. "Sarge, what are you doing?" Miller positioned wrench on first bolt, removing the depression stop. That is a safety feature. Sarge, if you remove that gun, can aim at ground right in front of us. Miller started turning bolt. I know that is the idea. First bolt came free. Miller dropped it in dirt. He positioned wrench on second bolt and torqued. The bolt resisted. He pulled harder. The bolt sheared. Miller tossed broken bolt aside. Depression stop fell off mount and landed in dirt. The Bowers now had no lower limit on barrel depression. Could aim from vertical sky to ground level. Miller climbed into gunner seat. He grabbed elevation wheel and turned. Barrel moved down past horizontal. Kept moving 5 degrees below. 10:15. Miller stopped when barrel aimed at hillside where bunker sat. He adjusted traverse until sights aligned on target. Gun was ready. Stevens loaded first round clip into auto-loader. Heavy steel clip slammed home with metallic clack. Gun was loaded, aimed, ready to fire. Miller wrapped hands around firing grips. His crew took positions. They had never done this. None knew if it would work, but they were about to find out. Miller pressed firing pedal. The Balfour roared. Sound was unlike anything infantry heard before. Not rifle crack, not mortar thump. This was deep, heavy mechanical hammering. Thump, 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 thump. Gun fired exactly 2 rounds per second. Recoil was violent. Entire mount jumped backward with each shot, digging into soft ground. Orange flame 2 feet long erupted from muzzle. Spent casings flew from ejection port, raining brass onto jungle floor. First shell hit hillside 10 feet below bunker. Explosion was shocking. Gout of black dirt and vegetation erupted from impact. Shell had not just hit ground. It excavated it. Crater was size of dinner table. Miller adjusted aim. Cranked elevation wheel up slightly. Fired again. Thump, 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 thump. Second burst walked up hillside. Shells impacted in line climbing toward bunker. Each impact threw dirt into air. Each explosion louder because getting closer. Miller was walking fire onto target using visual adjustment. Third burst hit bunker directly. First shell impacted concrete and logs at firing slit edge. Explosion was different, not just dirt. Shell hit something solid. Chunk of concrete size of man's head flew off bunker. Miller kept firing. Thump, 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 thump. Fourth burst hit same area. Concrete fragmenting, log splintering, sand shifting. Structure not just damaged, being disassembled piece by shells hitting at 2-second intervals. The auto-loader was brutally efficient. As fourth round in clip fired, empty clip ejected. Stevens already lifting next clip. 40-pound steel box. Slammed it into feed slot. Gun did not pause. Thump, 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 thump. Miller was in rhythm. Fire 4. Observe. Adjust if needed. Fire 4 more. Crew moving like machine. Stevens loading. Kowalski passing ammunition. Chun watching for problems. Miller firing. Gun spoke with precision. Thump, 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 thump. After 30 seconds sustained fire, Miller had put 60 rounds into bunker. 60 40 millimeters, shells impacting same 10-foot area. Bunker was not there anymore. Concrete shattered, logs blown apart. Sand slid away. Firing slit was jagged hole. Interior exposed. No return fire. Miller lifted handoff pedal. Force fell silent. Sudden absence of noise was painful. His ears rang. Hands cramped from gripping controls. Shoulder ached from recoil. He looked at hillside through sight. Smoke and dust obscured target. He waited for air to clear. When dust settled, Miller could see what 60 rounds did to fortification that mortars and bazookas could not crack. Bunker was gone. Not damaged, not suppressed, gone. Replaced by crater and rubble. Coconut logs that stopped bazookas were shattered splinters. Concrete that shrugged off mortars was pulverized gravel. Sand blown across hillside. Fortification that pinned platoon for 6 hours was deleted in 30 seconds. Collier stood at position edge, staring through binoculars. He lowered them slowly. Looked back at Miller's position. Could not see gun through vegetation, but knew where it was. Keyed radio, voice quiet. Whoever just did that, I owe you a drink. Multiple drinks. All the drinks. Subscribe right now because what you are about to hear is how Miller fought through gun overheating, Japanese counter-fire and ammunition shortages to clear an entire hillside, and how this one engagement changed anti-aircraft doctrine for the rest of the Pacific War. This is the only channel showing you the field innovations that won battles, while headquarters wrote reports about why it could not work. Do not miss what happens when the Japanese respond. Miller climbed out of gunner seat, legs shaking, adrenaline fading, exhaustion replacing it. He looked at crew. Stevens was grinning, Kowalski laughing, Chun checking barrel for heat stress. They had done something the manual said impossible. Used anti-aircraft gun to destroy ground fortification. It worked, but success drew attention. Within minutes, Collier's radio crackled with more requests. Charlie 6 to Charlie 7. We have bunker complex 200 yards north of your position. Can your fire support engage? Charlie 9 to Charlie 7. We have pillbox pinning down 3rd squad. Need immediate fire support. Miller listened to the requests piling up. He looked at ammunition supply. They had fired 60 rounds. They had 400 more in crates. The gun barrel was hot, but not critical. They could fire again. The question was whether they should. Using the Bowers for ground support was already a massive violation of doctrine. Continuing to do it was compounding the problem. Miller made his decision the same way he made the first one. Marines were dying. He could help them. That was enough. He keyed his radio. This is Bofors fire support. Send target coordinates. We can engage. The next hour became a systematic destruction of Japanese defensive positions across the entire sector. Collier's Marines marked targets with smoke grenades. Miller adjusted aim and fired. Thump, 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 thump. Each target received 30 to 60 rounds of 40 millimeters high explosive. Each target was reduced to rubble. The fortifications that had held up American advance for days were being deleted in minutes. But the gun was starting to protest. The Bofors was air-cooled, relying on wind over cooling fins to control temperature. In static position with no wind, barrel temperature climbed with each engagement. After 300 rounds, the barrel was glowing dull red. Paint was peeling off in white flakes. The metal was expanding from heat, changing the autoloader timing. Shells that should have fed smoothly were jamming. Stevens had to force clips into place. The gun was being pushed beyond design limits. At round 400, the Japanese responded. The bunkers Miller destroyed were part of a coordinated defense network, linked by telephone lines and visual signals. Japanese artillery observers positioned on hilltops 2 miles behind the ridge had been watching for hours. They saw the muzzle flashes. They heard the distinctive deep thump of the 40 millimeters autocannon. They calculated Miller's position using triangulation from multiple observation posts. They called fire missions to mortar teams positioned in valleys behind the ridge, where American counter-fire could not reach them. At 10:30 hours, Japanese 120 millimeters mortar rounds started falling around gun position. These were not small rounds. Each shell weighed 28 pounds of high explosive. They fell from the sky at near vertical angle with terminal velocity high enough to penetrate light cover. The first round landed 30 yards short, exploding with a blast that threw mud and vegetation 20 feet into air. The concussion wave hit Miller physically, making his ears pop. He did not need to be told what it meant. The Japanese were ranging in with methodical precision. The next round would be closer. The round after that might be direct hit. He had 2 choices. Displaced a new position, which meant stopping fire support when Marines were in the middle of advancing across open ground. If he stopped now, those Marines would be pinned again, caught between the bunkers he had already destroyed and the ones he had not yet engaged, or stay in position and accept the risk of being killed by the next salvo. Miller made his decision by not making one. He kept firing at the bunker Collier had marked. Thump, 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 thump. The second Japanese mortar round landed 20 yards away. Shrapnel buzzed overhead like angry hornets. Chun was hit in the leg by a fragment. He went down screaming, blood pouring from torn muscle. Kowalski dropped the ammunition crate he was carrying and dragged Chun to cover behind sandbags. Tied a bandage around the wound with shaking hands. Chun was out. They were down to 3 crew, and the Japanese were walking the mortar fire closer with every shot. Miller kept firing. The third mortar round landed 15 yards away. The blast wave knocked Stevens off his feet and threw him against the gun mount. He got up, nose and ears bleeding from a concussion, grabbed another ammunition clip with hands that were not quite steady. slammed it into Gunn. His face was gray with shock, but he kept moving. Miller fired. Thump, 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 thump. The fourth mortar round landed 10 yards away. The explosion was deafening. Miller felt the shock wave hit his chest like a physical blow. His vision went white for a second from the overpressure. When it cleared, he was still in Gunner's seat. Gun was still operational. He fired again. The Japanese mortar-fire was walking closer with mechanical precision. Every round was 3 yards closer than the last. 5 yards, 3 yards. Miller knew with absolute certainty that the next round would hit the gun directly. A direct hit on the bow furs would detonate every round of ammunition in the position. The explosion would be visible from a mile away. There would be no survivors. He kept firing because the mathematics were brutal but clear. If he stopped, Marines advancing under his fire support would be pinned again. They would die in the open ground with no cover. If he continued firing, he might die. But Marines were already dying. At least this gave them a chance to live. The next Japanese mortar round malfunctioned. It landed 2 yards from the gun position, but did not detonate. The dud round buried itself in soft ground. Miller did not know why it failed. Moisture in the propellant. Manufacturing defect. Random chance. He did not care. He fired the next burst. Thump, 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 thump. The Japanese mortar fire stopped. Miller did not know why that happened either. Maybe they ran out of ammunition. Maybe they displaced to avoid American counter-fire. Maybe they assumed they had destroyed the gun and moved to other targets. Whatever the reason, the mortar fire ceased. Miller kept firing at bunkers. At round 500, the barrel jammed. A shell casing expanded by extreme heat stuck in chamber. Breech failed to close. Gun stopped firing. Miller looked at Stevens. Clear that jam. Stevens grabbed a mallet from toolkit. He smashed charging handle trying to force bolt back. Would not move. Heat had fused brass to steel chamber. The gun was dead. Miller climbed out of seat. He looked at the barrel. It was warped, visibly drooping at muzzle. The rifling inside bore was eroded. Paint completely burned off, leaving bare white metal. The weapon had fired itself to death, but it had accomplished its mission. Every bunker Collier marked had been destroyed. The Marines were advancing across ground that had been impossible 6 hours earlier. Collier arrived at gun position 20 minutes later. He looked at the destroyed bowers, looked at the pile of spent brass casings knee-deep around position, looked at Miller sitting on ground with his back against sandbag wall, too exhausted to stand. Collier walked over and extended his hand. Miller took it. Collier pulled him to his feet. The Marine sergeant's grip was firm. His voice was quiet. You saved 30 Marines today. Probably more. Whatever happens next with your career, you need to know that. Miller nodded. He was too tired for words. Collier released his hand and walked back toward his platoon. The consequences came within hours. A logistics captain arrived at gun position in a clean uniform, face red with anger, carrying a clipboard thick with regulations. He saw the destroyed weapon, the pile of spent brass casings, the ammunition crates torn open and scattered across the position. His voice was loud enough to be heard across the clearing. He demanded to know who authorized using an anti-aircraft gun for ground support in direct violation of doctrine, who approved field modification of safety equipment, specifically prohibited by the manual, who took responsibility for destroying $5,000 worth of valuable specialized equipment that could never be replaced in this theater. Miller stood at attention, covered in soot and dried blood from the shrapnel wound in his shoulder. He had not noticed until the firing stopped. He looked the captain in the eye and said he did all of it. Every decision, every round fired, every regulation broken. The captain began writing charges for court-martial with angry pen strokes, unauthorized use of specialized equipment, destruction of government property, violation of standing orders regarding anti-aircraft weapon deployment, reckless endangerment of crew. The list went on. Then an infantry colonel arrived. He was older, maybe 50, with the weathered look of a man who had been in the Pacific since Guadalcanal. He had been monitoring radio traffic all morning from battalion headquarters. He had heard Collier's reports of bunkers being destroyed in seconds. He had watched on maps as his Marines advanced across ground they could not take for 3 days. He had counted the casualty reports that did not come in because Miller kept firing. He walked slowly around the destroyed gun, running his hand along the warped barrel, looking at the brass casings, the blood-soaked bandages, the exhausted crew sitting in the dirt, too tired to move. The colonel looked at the destroyed gun for a long time. Then he looked at Miller. Then he looked at the captain with his clipboard full of charges. The colonel's voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of command that made everyone in the clearing stop moving. He told the captain to put the clipboard away. The captain tried to object, saying regulations were clear. The colonel cut him off. He explained that the destroyed gun sitting in that pit had accomplished in one morning what an entire infantry battalion, supported by mortars and artillery, could not do in 3 days of fighting. He asked the captain how much the gun cost. The captain said approximately $5,000, including ammunition expended. The colonel asked him how much a Marine's life was worth in his accounting system. The captain did not answer. The colonel told him the court-martial was not happening. The captain opened his mouth to argue. The colonel told him if he wrote one word of charges against Miller or his crew, the colonel would personally see to it that the captain spent the rest of his career counting supply crates on the most remote island in the Pacific. The captain closed his clipboard and left. Subscribe to this channel right now and turn on all notifications, because next week we are breaking down 3 more weapons that soldiers used in ways headquarters said were impossible. Every single week, we show you the field innovations that won wars while officers were still writing doctrine manuals. This is not entertainment. This is education you will not find anywhere else. The story of the Bofors spread across the Pacific Theater. Other units started experimenting with anti-aircraft weapons for ground support. The doctrine changed. By 1944, Bofors guns were routinely deployed with infantry specifically for bunker-busting missions. The tactics Miller improvised in New Guinea became standard procedure. The gun that generals called a door-stop became one of the most requested fire support weapons in the Pacific. Miller survived the war. He went back to Pennsylvania, worked in a steel mill, never talked much about what happened in New Guinea. When people asked what he did in the Marines, he said he operated anti-aircraft guns. They would nod and assume he spent the war looking at empty sky, safe from real fighting. Miller never corrected them. He did not need glory. He needed to know that 30 Marines went home to their families instead of dying in New Guinea mud because he broke the rules. The destroyed Bauer sat in that gun pit for another week before salvage teams hauled it away. It was stripped for parts, melted for scrap, recycled into new weapons. But the lesson it taught lived on. There is no such thing as a useless weapon, only a lack of imagination. When doctrine says no and Marines are dying, sometimes the right answer is to break the rules and see what happens. Thank you for watching, and thank you for understanding that Sergeant Miller, who violated every regulation in the manual and destroyed a $5,000 weapon in 6 hours of sustained fire, saved more American lives that morning than any regulation ever could. The manual was written by people who were not there. Miller was there. He made the choice people who were not there could not make. And 30 Marines lived because of it. Hit subscribe right now. Then hit the like button, so YouTube shows this to more people who need to understand that military innovation comes from necessity, not planning. Drop a comment telling us where you are watching from and what forgotten innovation you want us to cover next. This community is worldwide, and you are part of keeping these stories alive.